Yeah. Huh? Yeah. Mhm. Sweet. All right. So we had our two different files. We had the first file, bookshelf, which just got us more used to kind of working with nested data. And then the other one we'll take a look at. But let's just do some code reading on this file. So Noah, would you mind starting us off? Could you read lines 1 through 5 and let me know if you would like any demos or any examples?
So we are
Remember to go line by line and
yes,
call out those line numbers.
so line 1 is declaring this is not the object, we are just doing this is the interface.
And what is this?
Yes, so this is line 1, defining the book structure
Interface.
or interface.
So on line 1, we're declaring the interface book, or we're declaring the book interface.
And the book literal interface is containing 3 on line 2 containing 3 elements.
Properties.
Line 2 the ISBN element with
Property.
property with type string. Line 3 the title property with the type string, and the author property with the type string, and we closing the book literal interface.
Yep, awesome. Thank you. Caroline, could you do the next little bit? And could you do 7 through 13?
Okay, on line 7, the book interface array.
So we'll start with right here.
Array object.
So it's not an array object. So this is just an
array
is being
assigned to the variable bookshelf, which is a type of book array.
Perfect.
On line 8, there's an opening curly brace. On line 9, the property ISBN has a value of a string. On line 10, the title property. On line 11 is the value of the title property, which is a string. On line 12, there's an author property with a string value, and on line 13, there's a closing curly brace.
Awesome, thank you. Ukaya, 14 through 18.
So there's an object on lines 14 to 18. On line 15, we have the ISBN property with the value of a string. On line 16, we have the title property with the value of a string. On line 17, we have the author property with the value of a string.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, no.
Yeah, just question, if you go to the top to the line 10, the line 7. So if you want to read it, so this is so we are assigning everything to the variable bookshelf with the so we are basically like in a normal in the formal language. This is like we are creating an array of books object, right?
Yes, so I'm creating an array of objects. Each object will be each individual book, and I'm assigning that to the variable bookshelf.
So now the bookshelf is the object.
Is the array of objects.
Array of objects.
Yeah. So on line 7, I'm assigning this array to the variable bookshelf. So bookshelf isn't an array, but what is inside of the array are objects.
So but why did we put the symbol the 2 brackets?
Because what am I assigning to bookshelf?
I thought we were assigning a book.
We're assigning an array. An array of books. So in an array of objects. So what this type is saying is that bookshelf is going to be of type array. So bookshelf is going to be in an array. What is inside the array? It'll be objects that match my book interface.
Oh, and after the equal, this is do the array, the syntax.
Yeah, that's where I'm actually doing the assignment.
Uh-huh.
So here is where I'm actually assigning the array to the variable bookshelf.
And the two curly braces for each one, this is a block of code of each.
These are the objects inside of the array.
So this is like a block, right? Like this is a separate.
It's an object.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, so it's, yeah, I remember how the.
So it's
this
an object that has an
syntax.
ISBN property, a title property, an author property.
Oh, yeah.
Trey, could you do lines 19 through 24, please?
On line 19, we have the opening curly brace. On line 20, we have the ISBN property with a string. And then on line 21, we have a title property. And on line 22, we have the string. And on line 23, we have the author property with a string. And on line 24, we have a closing curly brace with the ending comma.
Awesome. Yeah. For the properties, I would say either being assigned a string or has a value of a string. So just noting that it's being assigned something or what its value is essentially.
I will do, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Noah, could you do line 27, please? And let me know if you would like any assistance.
So the log method
Uh-huh.
of the console object is being called with two arguments.
Uh-huh.
And the two.
And the first argument is a
So this is on line 27, sorry.
Huh?
Line 27, and the first argument is. Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
yeah. So on line 27,
Yeah, just
the log method of the console object.
the log method of the console object is being called on two arguments. The
Uh-huh.
first argument,
What
It
is
is-
data type?
it is this
A string.
string.
Uh-huh.
And the second argument, it is the property
Uh-huh.
of it is the property of it is the property of the bookshelf of the first element of bookshelf.
So I would say on line 27, the log method of the console object is being called with two arguments, a string, and the author property of the bookshelf at one object.
Or on the first
The author property of the bookshelf at one object.
Okay, so one other is okay.
Yeah, so bookshelf is my array, but I'm accessing the object. So bookshelf at one is my
The second
object.
one.
So it's the author property of the bookshelf at one object. Awesome. Caroline, could you do line 28?
On line 28, the log method of the console object is being called with two arguments, a string and the ISBN property of the bookshelf object at index 0.
I would say the bookshelf at 0 object.
Oh,
Because bookshelf isn't an object, bookshelf is an array. The object is what I'm accessing.
the bookshelf. So the, can you just?
So
ISBN
bookshelf isn't an array. Inside of the array are objects. So bookshelf is not an object. Bookshelf at 0 is an object because
Okay.
inside of the array are objects. So that's why I say the ISBN property of the bookshelf at 0 object.
Thank you.
Mhm. And then Rukaya, line 29.
The log method of the console object is being called with two arguments, a string and the title property of the bookshelf at two object.
Yep, exactly. Perfect. Awesome. Were there any questions about this file? Working with nested data, how to access nested data, everybody understand why we had to do what we did?
So bookshelf is an array.
Yes, so
Okay.
bookshelf isn't an array,
Isn't.
because that square bracket right here. Also where our type comes into play, when I hover over bookshelf, you can see it's typed as a book array. So bookshelf is in an array, but what is gonna be inside the array? It'll be objects that match that book interface. Yeah, so bookshelf is in an array, which is why I'm able to access it by its index. And inside of the array will be those objects, which is how I get access to those properties. Yeah, and you can see like, VS Code will be pretty smart and it'll have like autocomplete. So as soon as I do one and then I do dot, you can see that it already shows me the properties that I have available. Because this is where I also get the power of TypeScript. I told bookshelf that it was going to be a book array. Well, what is inside of my interface book? An ISBN property, a title property, and an author property. So now TypeScript and VS Code both know that all of these properties should exist. So it's also going to help feed my auto suggestions because I already told TypeScript what properties are going to be inside the object. Any other questions about nested data? Okay, this is just a small little example. As you work with more and more data, it can get really nested. You could have, like, we have an array of objects. Inside of this object, it could have a another array, or favorite books, which would be, maybe another array. And inside of that array, there's more objects or whatnot. So it can keep on getting nested. Once we start working with APIs in week 5, then you're gonna get more familiar with working with nested data because you're gonna get these giant objects back from an API. But it is a good reference point to come back to of how to work and access our nested data. But whatever we also need to see, you can also just console log that bookshelf variable. So I can console log my bookshelf. Let me compile our code. Data model, solution. Okay, let me make sure this is being loaded. Yep. So console logs are our friend. Console logs allow us to see the data so that I can interact with it. So maybe, I want to see what's inside my bookshelf array. Well, I could console log it, I can open it up, and then I can view all my data from here. So now I can see, okay, well, bookshelf is an array. So now I know if I'm going to work with bookshelf, I need to give it an index, either 0, 1, or 2. So now, let's say I'll do 0. You can now see my browser is already pre-populating because it already knows what object I'm trying to access. Now I can even open up that index and then I can see the object and now I can see all the data that's inside. So now I can be like, oh, well, now I want to access the author, and then it would go ahead and log. So logging your objects out to the console are really beneficial and helpful because I can open it up, I can look at all the data, I can see all the properties. So that way I essentially know what property I need to access inside of my code right here. Yeah, girl.
So when we're working, for example, with a large amount of data, then we're basically deconstructing that data so we can work with it and make it more tangible.
I won't always, not necessarily deconstruct it, but like I may not use all the data that's provided to me. Sometimes I only want to use like some of it. So for instance, like so let's think about like I built that anime project or whatever, right? So I have a list of all these animes that get returned. If I click on an individual anime, you can see like I'm only showing the description, I'm only showing the video. There's more data. Like animes have like a rating, they have like a publisher, like the person that made it. I'm not showing any of that information, right? So I may not always use all of the data provided to me, but I may only use like some of it or whatnot, So
basically you created an object of your choice from.
I didn't create an object. This is the object that the API gave me.
Oh.
But I just use that object and I just access only the data that I want to. I only want the title. I only want the image. I only want the description. So I have, I'm not sure if it'll show me because, but if I look at the network, let's see.
We can see the gift.
I'm not sure if it's gonna show me because of, because I'm doing it in React. But if I were to make like, if we were to
Those
see my
again.
network call and what I actually got back, it would show everything right here. It's just because it's
okay,
because I'm doing it in
just-
React, so.
No worries, I was just wondering about that. So you actually just use that data, you didn't use that data to create your own object, that's what I was.
I'm just
confused about.
using the data
You're
that
just
they gave
using
me,
it.
exactly. I'm
Oh.
just not using all of it, I'm just using bits and pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I see, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no,
So just a question, so when you went to that website, the anime one, and then when you clicked inside the image, took you to another page. So this like hypothetically, like imagine if we are doing this on on HTML without any API. And we have files like this, so on HTML, the main, so the main file of the JavaScript is gonna be similar to what you did on the HTML one. The one on the index, you have the first file and then you have the second file. The second file is taken from the first file's
you can, so like that project, one JavaScript file, one JavaScript file, one HTML file, that's all it is.
But for example, if I want to apply the same thing on what we are doing here, because you have like two files,
Well, what do you mean I had two files?
like on the,
In this specific exercise?
yeah, on the.
I just had two files because I wanted you to do two different things. So I wanted you to have one file where you only worked on this one task, and you had another file where you only worked on that one task. Otherwise, I would have had you do everything in the same file. It was just purely for this specific exercise.
And
But I mean, as you'll learn, you'll move on over to the senior side and you'll learn about React. You are gonna wanna like breaking up your code into like organizational standards helps you. So it's much easier to look at one JavaScript file with 50 lines of code than one JavaScript file with 800 lines of code. So you do want to find ways to break it up. We won't necessarily cover that on the junior side because we're more so just cared about learning JavaScript. On the senior side, you'll learn a lot more about kind of organizational structure and how to break things up in other files and kind of import and export,
but there's no inheritance between the two.
no inheritance.
Just dividing, it's easier to.
Yeah, it's just for our sake.
Okay.
Any other questions about bookshelf before we move on to order history? Okay, we'll take a look at the order history. So we're not going to necessarily code read this file because we'll be here all week, but we'll just take a look at the solution and why we did a certain way. So let me pull up ours. So the goal of this exercise was to try to just kind of mimic this order history. So it was to kind of show the power of arrays and objects, how we can kind of use them interchangeably so that we can store all the data. So I have an order history, which is a collection of all these orders. So that's why we have everything stored inside of an array, because I have a collection of orders and there's going to be an order to those orders. Some orders happen before others. So that's why I started as in an array, because I'm storing a collection of everything. Each order is going to have some data that is very similar. Every order is going to have a date that that order was placed on. So I have a placed on property that's keeping track of that. Every single order is also going to have an order number. So I'm also keeping track of what the order number is. Every single order is also going to have a total. So I'm also keeping track of what the total of what that whole order is. Same thing with the recipient, who is actually going to be the person that is receiving the order. When was the order delivered on? So when was the order actually delivered, which is, we have our delivered date right here. And then items. So this is where things changed. I see people did things certain ways. The most common, I don't want to call it a mistake, but the most common thing that I'll see people do is they'll do something like this. And they'll do item 1 and, and they'll put their, JavaScript for impatient programmers or whatever.
That's what I did.
Yeah, and they'll do item 1, and then they'll do a title, or an author or whatever. But now, like, if I wanted to add a new item, well, now I would have to do item 2, right? And then I'd have to do item 3. This is like bad, because it's just like, well, what if an item or an order has like 20 items? I'm just gonna have to keep creating new properties for each one. What if an order only has 1 item? Do they still have all these properties, but they're just empty? So what we did is we stored them inside of an array. So we have a collection of all of our items. That way it can kind of grow and scale. Maybe they only have one item in their order. Well, we can do that. Maybe they have multiple items. But the items that they buy themselves are going to be different. For instance, if I'm buying a book is going to have a title, it'll have an author, it'll have, maybe an ISBN and whatnot. But if we see down here, one of the other things that we order is we order a GameCube controller. Well, a GameCube controller does not have an author. It does not have a title. So I can't necessarily use the exact same object because a book does not have a title and a GameCube controller does not have a title and it does not have an author, but a book does. And so by having this kind of items array, I can still store all of those items, but now I can make each individual item its own object. So that way I'm only storing information kind of uniquely related to that specific item. And now I can kind of just grow and kind of scale with that. So that's kind of the main difference that I see mostly from what people usually submit compared to what I do in my solution is most people will just try to do everything inside of here, like item 1 title or whatnot, and then item 2 title and stuff like that. But you don't want to kind of keep on just using properties. At that point, this is where arrays would really start to shine and where we can kind of combine and use them together. Does that make sense of why I used an array for items rather than just kind of keeping track of them individually as properties?
So if you go back, could you just go back to the image? Yeah,
the image, yeah.
Yes, I already have it here. So yeah, each order is gonna be object, and we're gonna describe everything like this.
Yep.
So the first one we have one item. The second object has one item, which is a book. The third one has one object, which is the one order. But the last one has two.
Yep.
Has like the last object has two
items.
Two items. Okay.
So that's why even for my other ones, my other orders where they only had one item, I still stored them as in an array because I don't know how many items someone buys until they place the order, right? If Caroline placed an order, you place an order, I place an order all at Amazon at once, I don't know how many items Caroline bought until she actually placed the order. Same thing with you. I don't know how many items you bought until you actually placed the order. Same thing with me. So if I didn't have an array, well, I don't know if I'm going to buy one. I don't know if Caroline's going to buy two or if you're going to buy three. So that's why I'm storing it as in an array because it can change. I might buy 4 items. You may buy 1. Caroline may buy 7 or whatnot. Do you have a follow-up question? Great, I'll get to you in a second.
This is about the reusability of the code. You've made this code reusable.
Yes.
Future.
So now I can easily, if you go and add something to your order, I just need to add a new object to my items array. Yeah.
Okay, but this one is still incomplete, right? Like probably if we use for loop with an array, if put the question, do you add the customer like in a real life example? Do you want to add another item? When you click OK, it's gonna like automatically, because we put a for loop with an array, it's gonna push if you do dot push.
Yeah. So like or like like you get those little pop-ups like, oh, do you want to keep shopping or do you want to go to your cart or whatnot? So they like, oh, I want to keep shopping, and now as soon as they click on the add to cart button again, well, now I just push it to their current items array.
Wow, this is kind of big.
And
And has a lot of gonna have a lot of malfunction that you need to fix because
yeah, but also the main thing here is my items are different. So one of the notes, and Trey, I'll still get to you in a second, I didn't forget about you. But in one of our things to keep in mind, we said try to give your order objects the same shape. So ideally, you want your objects to try to have the same properties. But with right here, if I'm buying a GameCube controller, but I'm also buying a book, well, they're not always gonna have the same data. Like a book has a title and an author, but a GameCube controller does not have a title and an author. And so here's where things can kind of change like a little bit, And that's why I want them to be in their own individual object, because they're gonna have their own information that's kind of uniquely to them. Noah, let me get the Trey and then we'll come back around to you. So Trey, what's up?
Yeah, so you kind of touched on what my question was.
Mhm.
I kind of went down a long, dark, deep rabbit hole, but I went so far as like on items, I was considering for like so like Amazon, they have different departments that you shop in. So for items, would in real life here, would you actually have different categories, departments? Would you have the quantity? Would you have like the on order, all that kind of stuff? Would that be here or would that be in a separate object?
For sure. No, that would definitely be here. So like the code that you sent me, you included a whole bunch of information that wasn't even like a part of the image, which is great. So it's like me, like this is kind of like a baseline. Like I was only keeping track of stuff that's here, but you added a lot of stuff that like, yes. So like right here, you know, items, type, hardware, name. I probably maybe would have also had a quantity, you know, and I put 1 or 2 or whatnot. So that way I know I specifically ordered that many of that items. Definitely, you know, like we have this type right here, like type hardware right here. This was type book. So this is kind of where those categories could come into play. But yeah, like you could definitely break it up a little bit, like even more and more and more and more. So it's like we kind of have everything shoved inside right here. The approach that I think I saw you were going for too is that you would break up things into like their kind of own objects. They're still all a part of one general order history, so they would still need to all come together at some point. But kind of breaking things up into like their own more individual objects, which isn't necessarily like a bad approach. But yeah, we could definitely have been a lot more detailed here, and there's a lot more information that we could have still even added.
Well,
So let me just Trey, did that fully answer your question? Did you have any follow-ups or anything?
No, I mean, you pretty much answered it. I was just curious if we would create a different object for like on hand inventory, or if it would actually be inside this object.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends, you know, it's like, it's up to us of how we want to define like what we want our data to look like. You know, if you get hired on, they already have an existing application and you'll probably just maintain their structure, you know, and maybe make changes there. But you know, it's kind of like the point of this exercise where like the way I wrote my code is probably different than the way that you wrote your code, which is probably different than the way that Rukai wrote her code and Caroline and Noah. So it just kind of goes to show that, you know, we all have different ideas of maybe how to kind of approach these things. So it's frustrating because sometimes, especially when you're learning programming, you want like to know what is right. Like, what do I do 100% of the time? But in programming, it depends. You know, there's never a 100% always. It's kind of, you know, what do you feel like is right at that moment? And let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that approach.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess, yeah, you kind of touched on what I was saying, best practices, but I guess that would depend on the company or your employer.
Exactly. It would depend, you know, Amazon's best practices because they gotta, you know, handle much more deliveries and much more at scale is gonna be different than like a mom and pop shop that, you know, deal with, you know, a couple customers a day or whatnot, you know, so it's gonna be different needs to kind of fit a different product.
Great question, Trey. Thank you. Thank you for asking that question.
Did you have another question, Caroline?
No.
You're good? Yeah. Noah, did you still have a question?
yeah, I just want to see, so, yeah, like for example, if I go to the image, to the same image, I'm looking to the first object. So I'm trying to create the interface order. So, so I'm looking, well, when I looked first time, so I'm gonna look. Okay, I can see order placed. I put I put like order date. This is the first one. I put a order number, and then I put the recipient shipped to, and I put a total price. Total price. I'm gonna put that number, right? Because
yeah, in theory, Rukaya actually, I did a back and forth on this too. You could go either way with the total or the price. We have the $sign, so in theory, I could see an argument being made where you would store this as a string, and you can do it that way. I probably would still store it as a number, but then when I went to go show it on the page, I would then add the $sign and like format it as a string. So it's like it's either way, it's like, do you want to store it that way? But since it is a number, logically, it makes more sense to me is to store it as a number. So that way, if I ever need to do anything number wise, it's already in that form.
Mhm.
And then when I actually want to go show it on the page, then I do the, show it as a string, but
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then, if when I go to total price, okay, total detail.
Mhm.
And then if I'm gonna look to the bottom, you see like this is the top, the top side.
Uh-huh.
You go to the bottom one, you
Mhm.
can see delivered on, I'm gonna put,
Mhm.
is this the delivered date and the book name and the author and stuff? Do I need to put it in items as you put?
So this is where things could kind of depend, right? Because I don't know if you've ever bought something from Amazon, right? Some packages come maybe on certain days. Generally they try to deliver everything all together, right? But sometimes they're like, oh, there's a delay in this one product. That product can't come until next week. So I put the delivered date on the actual order itself because it all ordered together. In theory, though, you can make an argument that the delivered on date should be on the individual objects for that item, because those items may have two different delivery dates. So in theory, things generally get delivered together, so it's all tied to the order, but sometimes specific items get ordered at different places. So it would kind of depend. In this case, we put it on the actual order, but in theory, knowing how Amazon works, you could put them on the individual items. But then again, this kind of gets into the argument where it kind of depends on the need, because some companies, they won't even send your order unless they have all the items, right? So then it makes sense to kind of have a delivered on for the whole order.
And for the items, the interface is gonna be pretty much, this is the type, title, this is the structure.
Yeah, so then,
With
so
the
you can
image.
see for my interface item, I have my type. You can see why are title and author optional? Any guesses?
I don't think title should be.
Because you can have a book or a hardware or
Yeah.
or-
Exactly, my item can change. It's not always gonna be a book, it could be a GameCube controller. So it's not always gonna have a title, it's not always gonna have an author. So in theory, if we really were gonna be very smart about this, I wouldn't necessarily just have like one item interface. I would have like a controller interface. I would have like a book interface. For every single item, for every
I
single.
just thought about that.
Yeah, and so it's like, again, for the sake of this, like, it's not really worth that, but it's like, if you think about Amazon, think about how much data they have, but now 13 the power of TypeScript. If I had an interface for every single type of item you could buy on Amazon, now if I misuse it, I catch that. Imagine if I just had one general item interface for all of Amazon, think about all the different things you could buy on Amazon. Think about how many potential mistakes I could make just by misusing that because of how much it has to account for.
Yeah,
No.
divide and conquer, it's easier.
So, now this exercise, it wasn't necessarily teaching anything new, but hopefully I feel like it opens your eyes to the power of objects and arrays and how we can really utilize those together to keep track of all of our different data. I will send this solution in our Slack channel so you can keep it as a reference. So if you ever want to look back upon it to see how I structured my code, you're welcome to do that. If you also wanted to send yours so you can see what other people did, feel free to do that as well. So if you're curious to see what all the other classmates did, you can feel free to share your solutions there as well. But did anybody else have any final questions about this specific exercise before we moved on?
We can still work on it, right? Like because I haven't finished.
As soon as I assign the next exercise, your priority is to move over to the next exercise. So you always want to work on whatever I currently assign, so that way you're ready for a Q&A. Otherwise, you're gonna get left in the dust. So as soon as we move on, you need to move on, and then if you need to finish it, you'll go back in your free time, you'll finish it. Rukaya.
So I know we're not there yet, but I just wanted to know that if I wanted to add more items to the items array, we could just use the push method to add the entire object, right?
Yeah. So then now, and this is where things get a little bit nested, right? So order history is in an array. I want to specifically add, so let's say I wanted to specifically add to this items array. Well, now I would have to do something like order history. Now let me actually write it as actual code so that way. So order history at 0. And then what property do I want to access? I want to access the items property. Now this is an array. So now I would want to push. And then here's where I would push menu object away. Yeah. So I could still push uniquely to that one items array for that one order. Awesome. Any other questions? Sound good? All right, well, hopefully that was a fun exercise.